All right, we're coming up here on the top of the hour. I'm going to skip over some stuff because I had a thing here. Okay, Charles Rangel over there in New York. He's out there screaming that it's time for a new military draft. Apparently, they have not been able to starve enough young Americans into conscripted service in the military to go out and kill the people that Israel wants dead, or to go out and kill those nations that dare to presume to have an economy that doesn't include a private central bank. So Charles Rangel is out there calling for a military draft. Now, Charles Rangel does not have a direct email address that's been made public. You have to go through a web form on the congressional website, and that does not allow you to put attachments. So what I did, I need a favor from all of you. It's going to cost you a stamp. Underneath this story about Rangel renewing call for military draft, I've posted a link to the official enlistment forms for the United States military. It's a PDF file. Print it out. Put it in an envelope, and I put Charles Rangel's actual postal mailing address at the Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C. And include a note saying that if he really thinks war is necessary and a good thing, that it ought to be the young people from his own family who go first. And that if you're not willing to commit your own kids, your own nieces and nephews into this fight, then shut the heck up and leave the rest of our kids alone. And I want to do that to anybody from this point on who's saying, we got to have a great war. Great. Here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Get on the plane and go do it. But if you're not going to be out there leading your own armies out there, then shut the heck up. Alexander the Great led his own armies on his wars of conquest. So did the Caesars. Stalin put his own sons on the front lines fighting the Nazis in World War II. Where are the real leaders in our country who, if they are morally certain war is necessary, they get out there and they lead it themselves? I don't think we've had one since Eisenhower. I think Eisenhower is the last president we had who actually led armies into war, was in the combat zone, was getting shot at. All we have now are these sellout artists, these con artists who sit there and they take the money and say, yeah, we'll rent you, all these American kids, to go make war on your chosen enemy. That's what it is. Your kids are being sold as slaves, as mercenaries, as chattel to anybody with money to go make war on their enemies. AIPAC comes in to Congress and says, here's a couple of $1 million in campaign funds. We need you to send the American kids out there to slaughter Iraqis because we don't like them. And the Congress says, all right, sure, we'll make up some crud about weapons of mass destruction and we'll send off the American kids to kill your enemies in Iraq. Now they're trying to do the same thing in Iran. It's slavery. The United States government, especially under Barack Obama, has brought slavery back to the United States of America because every kid in uniform who is rented out in service to foreign governments to make war on that foreign government's enemy is a slave. We'll be back after the news and commercials.
Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And there are some new developments coming in here. As we mentioned yesterday, it appears the United States is attempting to foment a new revolution inside Russia to bring down the Russian Federation in order to pave the way for a new version of the Soviet Union. So once again, the U.S. government can say, commies, the commies are coming to get you, and keep us. Basically, the United States government cannot function in the 21st century. They're hopelessly over their heads dealing with the new realities of global communication, the internet, the alternative media. You know, not having a big evil enemy that they can wave at us that we will actually believe. Because we know Al-Qaeda was a hoax. We know FEMA's a joke. We know the Russians are not a threat to us any more than the Iranians are. So the U.S. government sees itself as collapsing unless they can get back to the height of the Cold War. And now we're getting more confirmation that what has been going on in Russia is an American covert operation. Because the Russian website Life News has just published emails that show continuing correspondence between this Russian election watchdog Golos that has been screaming the election that supported Putin was fraudulent, and the United States State Department. Apparently this so-called election watchdog group in Russia that's been crying fraud, fraud, fraud is being paid by the United States government. We have seen this before. We saw it in Iran in 1953. We saw it in Chile when the CIA brought down the democratically elected government of Allende and installed the dictator Pinochet. This is how the United States does business. It always has. This is why the United States and Americans are hated around the world. Not because of our freedoms, but because we don't respect the freedoms of other countries. Our government has gotten into this very bad habit of just assuming it is their divine right to go in and destroy the government of any country that refuses to do as they're told. And Putin is understandably angry at Hillary Clinton's coming in there and saying, well, you're not the legitimate government anymore. We're going to put in a new legitimate government that'll play ball with us, that'll help us crush Iran and do all these other things Israel is ordering us to do. Because the United States understands that what Putin did to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when they kicked out the oligarchs and succeeded in paying off Russia's debt in just 3 years, while the United States here is mired under nobody even really knows how many trillions of debt that we're all struggling with. But you know, that's the problem with the bankers. The bankers can't stand any country that isn't in debt. They hate it. They'll start wars to get rid of it. Whether it was Germany abandoning the private central bank and going to a value-based currency that turned Germany's economy around, well, we better boycott them. We've got to destroy them. We can't let the rest of the slaves see what it's like to be free. Boycott Germany. We don't care if it starts a world war. We'll make money off that world war, sure. 2 years ago, Gaddafi was everybody's buddy, reformed terrorist, everybody's friend, willing to do business with everybody. Then he turns around and says, by the way, we're starting a state bank, and we're going to have a value-based currency called the gold dinar. And the rest of Africa said, heck yeah, that's going to work better for us than this paper dollar that we can't trust the value on. So, of course, boom, go in, destroy Libya, kill Gaddafi, force a private central bank back on those uppity slaves. That's what's going on here. The clash of civilizations, this push into World War III, is all about returning the world to the enslavement of private central banking. All these countries that are trying to break free, that are trying to go back to the same economic system the United States started with. That's what's going on. Every nation that struggles to become free has to be reconquered by the bankers, either by stealth or by outright military action. And every time you see one of these revolutions or anything going on, what's the first thing the so-called revolutionaries say is, yes, we'll accept a private central bank. That's what happened in Libya. And that was the group that the United States supported. Yes, we'll put you in power. Just remember your promise to put in a private central bank. Because the private central bankers of the world are terrified of any nation that's free from the influence, because it might give bad ideas to the other slaves.
I see. Wonderful. And I have just a second question quickly, Mike. Where do you see the Canadian economy in terms of the U.S.? I know, we talk about here, the Canadian banks may be a little stronger or whatever they say, but in, the research you've done, what do you see? I know it's a fiat currency, but what's your opinion on, the Canadian economy and where that's going with the crisis we're heading into?
Oh, well, unfortunately, sadly, because of the very strong economic and governmental ties between Canada and the United States, I think if the United States collapses, unless Canada moves to sever all connections immediately, it'll get dragged down as well. And as a matter of fact, we just put an article up at whatreallyhappened.com saying that Canada's banks may, in fact, already be in trouble because of those linkages. Thank you for the call. We got to take a break. We'll be right back. Little story, a lot of people don't know about this. We've all heard of Marco Polo and how he did his amazing travels out to China, and he came back and he brought back all these amazing stories. What most people don't know, because our schools don't teach it, is that Marco Polo, on his return from China, was grabbed and thrown into prison by the monks of the Dominican order. Now remember, the Dominican order are the monks and monasteries around St. Dominic, who became St. Dominic after he killed 1/3 of the population of southern France in the last of the wars to eradicate the biological descendants of Jesus. You know, the kill them all, let God sort them out kind of thing that was going on back there. So Domingo de Guzman just slaughtered all of these people who knew that there was a second parallel Christian church that was being run by Christ's family, which was a threat to the apostolic descent of the Catholics. So go in, kill them all, return them to the slavery of the papacy. So Marco Polo comes back from China. The Dominicans grab him, they throw him in prison, and they keep him there for like years because the Catholic Church was terrified of ordinary people finding out that there was another entire civilization out there, just as civilized, in fact, in many ways more advanced than that of Europe at the time, who didn't even know there was such a thing as a Christ. Because the church had convinced everybody in Europe at that time that you couldn't exist without the Catholic Church. You had to have priests involved in everything that you did. There was no other way to live. And all of a sudden, here was this empire to the east that lived quite well without Christians and Catholics and baptism and all the rest of this stuff. And proved that, yeah, that particular form of religion wasn't an indispensable adjunct to life. And we've got the same thing going on here today. Instead of the imaginary person of gods and saints and the rest of it, we have the imaginary persons of the corporations. But they're still doing the same thing. They're trying to create a world in which you are all taught to believe that this imaginary person called the corporation and his priests at the banks are an indispensable part of everyday life, including the private central bank, the money changers. And just like the Dominicans did to Marco Polo, the private central bankers today are terrified that you will see that it's possible to have a national economy that doesn't need a private central bank. In fact, does much better without one. And that's why we're on the verge of this global thermonuclear meltdown, because the bankers can't let go. They're money junkies. They're going to blow the entire world up because of their addiction. You know, like Bernie Madoff, and he's got all this money and he still has to go out and cheat for more of it. Or this family up in Washington State, they're living in a $1.2 million waterfront home. They're rich. He's a chiropractor. She's successful, but they still got to go out and cheat the welfare system because they got to have more money. They're addicts. And our world hovers on the edge of utter destruction because the money junkies don't realize they're sick. We've all heard stories about how drug addicts will do things which seem absolutely insane to the rest of us, but make perfect sense to the drug addicts. They wind up burning down their home or killing their own kids or family or something. I remember some horror stories from when I was living in Southern California about this chemical called angel dust and what people on it were doing. I got attacked by a duster at one point. It was just, an ugly situation. Well, money addicts are just like that. Money junkies do really terrible, bad things in the throes of their addiction. They've done brain scans on Wall Street traders, and the part of the brain that lights up when they score more money is exactly the same one that lights up when they do a line of cocaine. It's not a coincidence that there is so much cocaine flowing all around Wall Street. And it's documented in that movie, Inside Job, that won the Academy Award for Best Documentary this last year, where there's a guy in there saying, I can't believe these guys are doing that much cocaine at night and they're still okay to go to work the next day. Well, if you're doing it on a regular basis, yeah, after a while it takes a lot to get any kind of a buzz. But that's what we're dealing with here. We're not dealing with economy. We're not dealing with government or good management. We're all the victims of drug addicts, money addicts, addictive behavior, and it's completely out of control. We'll be back after these commercials.